In the summer of 2007, the Yukon River in Alaska became the setting for one of the most puzzling disappearances in the state's recent history. A case that would challenge investigators, divide a community, and forever change how wilderness tragedies are understood. Michael Harrington, a 42-year-old biology professor at Fairbanks University, was no stranger to Alaska's rugged landscape. Colleagues described him as methodical, cautious, a man who studied wilderness survival techniques with the same academic rigor he applied to his research on freshwater ecosystems. His 10-year-old daughter Lily had inherited her father's affinity for the natural world, along with his careful, observant nature. Their annual fishing trips had become something of a legend among their friends. The professor and his precocious apprentice venturing into the wild together, returning with stories and specimens that would later become teaching tools in Michael's classroom. Michael knew the river better than most guides, remembered Dr. Eleanor Frost, his department chair. He could tell you where every eddy formed, where the best fishing spots were, which areas to avoid. Safety was always his first consideration, especially with Lily. The father-daughter expedition that began on Friday, July 13, 2007, was meant to be a 3-day journey along a stretch of the Yukon that Michael had navigated successfully many times before. Sarah Harrington, Michael's wife of 15 years, helped them pack their gear that morning, checking items off a list they'd refined over years of similar outings. "I remember teasing them about the date," Sarah would later tell investigators, her voice hollow with the cruel irony. "Friday the 13th. Michael laughed and said science professors don't believe in superstitions. That was the last thing I said to them. A joke about bad luck. The plan was simple. Michael and Lily would drive to a popular launch point near Eagle, Alaska, paddle downstream for approximately 8 miles, and camp at one of several established sites along the riverbank. They would spend Saturday fishing and exploring, then begin their return journey Sunday morning, expecting to be home by early evening. When they hadn't returned by 9 p.m. Sunday night, Sarah called the local ranger station. By midnight, the first search teams were assembling. The initial search focused on the area where Michael and Lily had planned to camp. Rangers found their vehicle parked at the launch site, locked and undisturbed. By first light Monday, volunteer teams were combing both banks of the river, while a Coast Guard helicopter scanned from above. The weather had been clear that weekend, with no storms or unusual conditions reported, a detail that would later become significant as investigators tried to piece together what happened. 3 days into the search, rangers discovered what appeared to be the remains of a campsite approximately 7 miles downstream from the launch point. A fire pit, recently used, a small clearing where a tent had been pitched. Nearby, a tree with a torn strip of blue fabric caught on a branch, the same color as Lily's rain jacket. The discovery renewed hope among searchers, but no other significant evidence was found at the site. No personal belongings. No boat, no fishing equipment. And most concerningly, no sign of Michael or Lily. As the search entered its second week, the narrative began to shift. David Lawrence, chief ranger for the Yukon Charlie Rivers National Preserve, called a press conference that would set the tone for how the case would be understood by the public for years to come. "We're dealing with one of the most remote and challenging environments in North America," Lawrence told the assembled reporters, his weathered face grave under the brim of his ranger hat. "The Yukon River system is home to healthy populations of brown bears, black bears, and wolves. The water is cold enough to induce hypothermia within minutes of immersion. The terrain is difficult. While we continue to hope for the best, we must acknowledge the realities of this environment." The press seized on Lawrence's measured warning. By the next day, headlines across Alaska read, "Bear attack suspected in disappearance of father and daughter. Wilderness claims 2 more. The dangers of Alaska's backcountry and Yukon River, beauty and peril." Narrative of a wildlife encounter gone wrong had taken hold. reinforced by the discovery of what appeared to be large animal tracks near the abandoned campsite. Dr. James Whitaker, a wildlife biologist with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, was brought in to examine the tracks. His assessment, while cautious, lent credibility to the emerging theory. What we're seeing here is consistent with a brown bear, likely female, possibly with cubs, Whitaker told reporters. The tracks suggest the animal approached the campsite from the forest side, not the riverbank. This time of year, bears are actively feeding, building fat reserves for winter. They can be especially aggressive if they perceive a threat to their young. Whitaker stopped short of definitively stating that a bear had attacked the Harringtons, but his expert opinion, combined with the remote location and lack of other evidence, made the wildlife encounter theory the most plausible explanation in the minds of many. The media reinforced this narrative with segments on bear safety and interviews with survivors of animal attacks. One local news station ran a special report titled, "When the Hunter Becomes the Hunted," featuring dramatic reenactments of bear encounters. For 2 weeks, the search continued with diminishing returns. No bodies were recovered, no boat was found. No definitive evidence of what had happened to Michael and Lily Harrington emerged from the wilderness. The lack of closure haunted the community and particularly tormented Sarah, who found herself caught in the limbo of grief without confirmation. "Not knowing is its own special kind of hell," she would later write. "You can't move forward. You can't go back. You're just ... suspended." As July turned to August, pressure began mounting to officially conclude the search. Resources were stretched thin, and other emergencies in the vast Alaskan wilderness demanded attention. The cost of continuing helicopter searches alone was approaching 6 figures. At a closed-door meeting of search coordinators, voices of pragmatism began to overpower hope. "I've been doing this for 25 years, said Jack Thornton, a veteran search and rescue coordinator. "At some point, we have to make the call. If they were still alive out there, we would have found some indication by now." Sarah Harrington refused to accept this logic. When informed that the search would be scaled back, she appeared at the ranger station the next morning with camping gear and a topographical map. "If you're not going to look for them, I will," she told Lawrence, her voice steady despite her evident exhaustion. "I'll search every mile of that river myself if I have to." Lawrence, moved by her determination but bound by protocol, arranged for 2 rangers to accompany Sarah for 3 more days of targeted searching. Those 3 days yielded nothing except more questions. Why had no life vests washed ashore? Why had none of their brightly colored gear been spotted from the air? How could 2 people and a canoe simply vanish without a trace? On August 17, 2007, the official search for Michael and Lily Harrington was suspended. The case remained open, but active search operations ceased. The press release described the presumed cause as a probable wildlife encounter followed by water immersion, the clinical language doing little to capture the human tragedy behind the statistics. Sarah Harrington stood before cameras that afternoon, dark circles under her eyes, her voice thin but determined. "My husband and daughter are not statistics," she said. "They are not cautionary tales about wilderness safety. They are people, intelligent, careful people who knew what they were doing. Something happened out there that doesn't fit the narrative we're being fed, and I will not rest until I know what that is." Her words would prove prophetic, though few took them seriously at the time. Most viewed her statement as the understandable denial of a grieving wife and mother, unable to accept the harsh realities of Alaska's wilderness. The case began to fade from public attention, filed away as another tragic reminder of nature's indifference to human life. Sarah returned to the empty family home in Fairbanks, now filled with echoes and absences. Michael's coffee mug still sat on his desk in the study. Lily's backpack hung on its hook by the door, waiting for a school year that would never come. Sarah moved through the rooms like a ghost, unable to disturb these artifacts of interrupted lives, unwilling to accept they would never be completed. At night, She spread maps across the dining room table, tracing the river's path with her finger, trying to envision what might have happened. During the day, she called ranger stations, wildlife experts, other search and rescue organizations, anyone who might offer a different perspective. Most were sympathetic but firm in their assessment. The wilderness had claimed Michael and Lily as it had claimed others before them. People don't understand how quickly things can go wrong out there, one ranger told her gently. One moment of inattention, one wrong step, one curious predator. That's all it takes. But Sarah couldn't reconcile the cautious, prepared Michael she knew with the careless victim in these scenarios. Nor could she imagine Lily, who had been taught wilderness safety since she could walk, making a fatal error. The pieces didn't fit, no matter how she arranged them. 2 months after the disappearance, Sarah found herself standing in Michael's university office, boxing his belongings. His colleague, Dr. Martin Chen, helped her sort through the academic papers and field journals. "I found something you might want to see," Chen said, handing her a leather-bound notebook. Michael's field notes from his last few research trips to the Yukon. There's a section about unusual human activity he observed at one of his study sites. Sarah opened the journal to the marked page. Michael's neat handwriting filled the margins around a detailed map of the river segment where he and Lily had disappeared. He had noted coordinates of what he called unauthorized structures and evidence of trapping outside regulated seasons. There were photographs paper-clipped to the page's distant shots of what appeared to be a small cabin or shed well hidden among the trees and close-ups of snare wires attached to trees. He was documenting poaching, Chen explained. Nothing dramatic, just subsistence hunting outside regulated seasons. He mentioned it to me once, said he was going to report it to Fish and Wildlife after gathering more evidence. I didn't think much of it at the time. Sarah stared at the journal, a cold sensation spreading through her chest. Did he tell anyone else about this? Chen shrugged. Probably mentioned it to his conservation biology students. Maybe at the department meeting last spring. Why? Because no one from the search team ever mentioned this, Sarah said quietly. No one investigated these structures or considered that Michael might have encountered whoever was setting these traps. Sarah, Chen said gently, illegal trapping is fairly common in remote areas. Most of these people avoid confrontation at all costs. They run at the first sign of others. Most, Sarah repeated. But not all. That evening, Sarah called Thomas Riley, the Fish and Wildlife officer who had participated in the search. When she described Michael's journal and asked if the illegal structures had been investigated, the long pause on the other end of the line told her everything. Mrs. Harrington, Riley finally said, we were focused on finding your husband and daughter, not investigating minor poaching operations. And frankly, the likelihood of a trapper attacking a professor and his child over some field notes is, well, it's not something we considered viable compared to the environmental hazards. So you didn't even look, Sarah said, her voice flat. By the time we found the campsite, we were already working under the assumption of a wildlife encounter, Riley admitted. The tracks, the torn clothing, it all pointed in that direction. Sarah hung up without saying goodbye. She sat at her kitchen table, Michael's journal open before her, and began to make notes of her own. The official narrative had taken hold so quickly, so completely, that alternative explanations had never been fully explored. What if the animal tracks had been a convenient misdirection? What if the torn fabric had been placed deliberately? What if the empty campsite told a different story than the one investigators had chosen to read? For the first time since the disappearance, Sarah felt something beyond grief stirring within her, a sense of purpose, a direction for her pain. Michael's research had potentially made him enemies. Someone out there might know more than they were saying. The wilderness might not be the only predator along the Yukon's shores. The following morning, Sarah called the local newspaper and asked to speak with a reporter named Jake Simmons who had covered the disappearance extensively. When he arrived at her home, she showed him Michael's journal and outlined her concerns about the limited scope of the investigation. "I'm not saying I know what happened," she told him. "I'm saying no one knows what happened, and some possibilities were never properly investigated." Simmons examined the journal with professional interest. "This is compelling, Mrs. Harrington, but it's circumstantial. Even if there were illegal trappers in the area, connecting them to your husband's disappearance would be nearly impossible without more evidence." "Then help me find more evidence," Sarah said. "You're a journalist. You investigate things. Isn't that your job?" Simmons looked uncomfortable. "My editor has moved on from this story. We've run the wildlife expert quotes, the safety tips, the memorial pieces. People have, well, they've accepted the official explanation." "I haven't," Sarah said firmly. Later that week, the newspaper ran a small piece titled, "Questions Remain in Harrington Disappearance," buried on page 6. It mentioned Michael's documentation of illegal trapping activities but framed Sarah's concerns as the understandable but ultimately misguided efforts of a grieving widow to find meaning in tragedy. The article concluded with a quote from Ranger Lawrence reiterating that all evidence pointed to a tragic wildlife encounter, followed by water immersion. The story might have ended there, with Sarah's questions fading into the background noise of a community that had already moved on. But 3 weeks after her meeting with Simmons, Sarah received an anonymous envelope in her mailbox. Inside was a single photograph granny, taken from a distance showing what appeared to be Michael's canoe partially hidden under brush on a riverbank. Scrawled on the back were the words, "Look deeper." Sarah's hands trembled as she studied the image. The canoe's distinctive red stripe was visible despite the poor quality of the photograph. She immediately called Ranger Lawrence, who agreed to meet her the following morning. "Where did you get this?" Lawrence asked, examining the photograph in the sterile conference room of the ranger station. "It was anonymous," Sarah said, "but it proves the canoe didn't wash away downriver. Someone found it and hid it. Someone who doesn't want to be officially involved but also doesn't want the truth buried." Lawrence frowned. "Or someone is playing a cruel joke on a grieving woman. This could be any red-striped canoe, Sarah. The image is too blurry to make a positive identification." "Then send a team to check," Sarah insisted. "The photo shows landmarks, that distinctive bent tree, the rock formation. Someone local would recognize this spot," Lawrence sighed. "Even if we found the canoe, it wouldn't necessarily change the overall assessment. Bears are known to drag items away from campsites. They're curious animals, especially the younger ones. Or someone wanted us to think it was bears," Sarah countered. "Someone who knew exactly how the evidence would be interpreted." Lawrence regarded her with a mixture of sympathy and frustration. "Sarah, I understand you need answers. But sometimes in the wilderness, clear answers aren't available. We deal in probabilities, in known patterns of behavior, both animal and human. And the probability that your husband and daughter encountered a dangerous animal is far higher than the alternative you're suggesting." Sarah took the photograph back, her jaw set. "Probabilities don't explain this. Someone found that canoe, someone took this picture, and someone wanted me to see it." As she left the ranger station, Sarah felt the weight of institutional resistance pressing against her. The narrative had been established. The case was effectively closed. Any evidence that didn't fit the accepted explanation would be minimized, rationalized, or ignored. If she wanted the truth, she would have to find it herself. That night, Sarah created a blog titled "Finding the Harringtons." In her first post, she shared the anonymous photograph and Michael's journal entries about the illegal trapping activities. She wrote about the rush to judgment, the unanswered questions, the inconsistencies in the official narrative. She asked readers to come forward with any information, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant. "I don't know yet what happened to my husband and daughter," she concluded, "but I know there's more to the story than what we've been told. And I will not stop until I uncover the truth, whatever it may be." As autumn descended on Alaska, painting the wilderness in fiery hues, Sarah Harrington prepared for her own long, cold season of searching. The truth was out there, buried beneath layers of assumption and convenience. And she was determined to unearth it, no matter what predators, human or animal, might be lurking in the shadows. Sarah's blog gained traction slowly at first, then with unexpected momentum. Within weeks, Finding the Harringtons had attracted a dedicated following, mostly true crime enthusiasts, wilderness safety advocates, and a handful of local residents who harbored their own doubts about the official narrative. Comments and emails flooded in, some offering genuine support and information, others peddling wild conspiracy theories or cruel hoaxes. Sarah sifted through them all with methodical determination, separating potentially useful leads from noise. One comment, posted anonymously 3 weeks after the blog launched, stood out from the rest. Check property records for cabin permits along the eastern bank, 3 to 5 miles downstream from where they were last seen. Not all structures in the preserve are authorized or documented. Sarah forwarded the tip to Ranger Lawrence, who dismissed it as speculation from an internet sleuth. Undeterred, she drove to the county records office and spent hours combing through property maps and permit applications. What she found confirmed the anonymous commenter's suggestion. Several cabin permits had been issued for that stretch of riverbank, but satellite imagery showed at least 3 additional structures that didn't appear in any official records. When Sarah brought this information to the ranger station, she was met with the same patient but dismissive response. Unregistered hunting cabins aren't unusual in remote areas, explained Deputy Ranger Collins. People build them, use them for a season or two, then abandon them. It doesn't mean they're connected to your husband's disappearance. But did anyone check them? Sarah pressed. Did anyone interview the owners of these cabins? Did anyone cross-reference the locations with Michael's notes about illegal trapping? Collins exchanged an uncomfortable glance with Lawrence. Our investigation focused on environmental factors and wildlife behavior patterns. We didn't have probable cause to investigate private property or harass cabin owners based on speculation. Sarah left the station with a familiar feeling of frustration hardening into resolve. If officials wouldn't investigate these leads, she would find someone who would. Keith Parker was not what Sarah had expected when she placed the ad seeking a private investigator. Fresh-faced and barely 30, with an earnestness that seemed at odds with his chosen profession, he had opened his one-man agency just 6 months earlier after leaving the Juneau Police Department. His rates were surprisingly affordable, a fact explained by his admission that the Harrington case would be his first major investigation as a private detective. I followed your blog, Keith told Sarah during their first meeting at a coffee shop in Fairbanks. The evidence you've gathered independently is impressive. The authorities definitely moved too quickly to the animal attack theory. Can you help me look into the illegal structures along the river? Sarah asked. I don't have the authority to investigate private property, but I need to know if any of them are connected to Michael's research. Keith nodded thoughtfully. I can do some reconnaissance, maybe pose as a hiker or fisherman to get a look at these cabins without trespassing. But Sarah, he leaned forward, his expression serious, if we do find something criminal, we take it straight to the state police, not local authorities. This case has already been tainted by tunnel vision and confirmation bias at the local level. For the first time in months, Sarah felt the weight on her shoulders lighten slightly. Here, finally, was someone who took her concerns seriously, who saw the same inconsistencies she did. There's something else, she said, pulling out a folder. After I posted about the canoe photograph, I received an email from a fisherman named Joseph Winters. He claims he saw 2 young men loading a red-striped canoe onto a truck near Bell's Landing last August, about a week after the disappearance. He thought nothing of it at the time, assumed they were just recreational paddlers. It was only after seeing my blog that he made the connection. Keith reviewed the email, his expression thoughtful. Did he get a license plate? Description of the men? Sarah shook her head. He's elderly. His eyesight isn't great. But he's certain about the canoe. Said the red stripe was distinctive hand-painted, not factory. It's worth following up, Keith said. Bell's Landing is miles downstream from where your husband and daughter were camping. If their canoe ended up there, it either drifted a very long way around several bends in the river, or someone transported it there, Sarah finished. As autumn deepened into winter, Sarah and Keith developed a working rhythm. Keith conducted field investigations, tracking down leads and interviewing potential witnesses, while Sarah managed the blog and analyzed the information they gathered. Together, they built a case file that grew increasingly at odds with the official narrative of a wildlife encounter. Joseph Winters, the elderly fisherman, proved to be a valuable if imperfect witness. Though his memory of specific details was hazy, his certainty about the canoe never wavered. When Keith showed him photographs of similar canoes, he immediately identified Michael's based on the distinctive hand-painted stripe. Michael did that himself, Sarah explained when Keith reported back. He painted that red stripe the summer before, said it would make the canoe easier to spot from the air if they ever needed rescue. Ironic, isn't it? The one thing designed to make them more visible is what someone tried to hide. The most compelling evidence came from Dr. Whitaker, the wildlife biologist who had initially supported the bear attack theory. When Keith approached him with Sarah's growing file of inconsistencies, Whitaker agreed to review the case with fresh eyes. I was brought in after the narrative had already been established, Whitaker admitted during a recorded interview in his office at the Department of Fish and Game. The tracks I saw were consistent. With a brown bear, that's true. But I never definitively stated that a bear had attacked anyone. That leap was made by others and then reinforced by media coverage, Keith pressed further. In your professional opinion, Dr. Whitaker, how likely is it that a bear attack would leave no blood evidence at the scene? No torn gear aside from that single piece of fabric? No disturbance to the campsite beyond some tracks? Whitaker shifted uncomfortably. It's unusual. In documented bear attacks, there's typically substantial physical evidence. Bears aren't subtle predators, and they don't clean up after themselves. But every case is unique, and absence of evidence isn't necessarily evidence of absence. What about the canoe? Keith asked. If a bear attack occurred at the campsite, followed by the victims entering the water as suggested in the official report, wouldn't the canoe likely remain at the scene or wash up nearby? One would expect so, Whitaker conceded, unless unusually strong currents carried it far downstream. And if the canoe were found hidden under brush miles away? Whitaker's expression changed. That would be difficult to attribute to animal behavior or natural processes. Keith recorded this conversation and several others, building a case file that increasingly pointed away from wildlife and toward human intervention. But as their investigation progressed, so too did the resistance from the community. Sarah's blog had not gone unnoticed in Fairbanks. What began as sympathetic indulgence of a grieving widow's denial had hardened into irritation and outright hostility from some quarters. The wilderness tourism industry, a significant economic driver in the region, was particularly vocal in its criticism. Tragic accidents happen in the wilderness, wrote Robert Kane, president of the Fairbanks Tourism Bureau, in a letter to the editor published in the local newspaper. By spinning conspiracy theories instead of accepting the expert consensus, Mrs. Harrington is not only prolonging her own grief, but potentially damaging the reputation of our region and those who work hard to keep visitors safe. The letter sparked a heated debate in the community. Some defended Sarah's right to seek answers, while others accused her of irresponsibility, attention-seeking, even mental instability. When Sarah visited the grocery store, conversations would halt as she walked down the aisle. Former friends crossed the street to avoid awkward encounters. Her mailbox filled with anonymous notes ranging from pitying to threatening. "Stop digging or you'll join them," read one note. composed of letters cut from magazines and left on her windshield. Sarah handed it to Keith, who immediately took it to the state police. The officer who took the report seemed unmoved. "People say thoughtless things to grieving families all the time," he said, placing the note in an evidence bag with visible reluctance. "It's probably just someone who thinks they're doing you a favor by pushing you to move on." Keith was less dismissive. "That's not someone trying to help her move on. That's someone who feels threatened by what she might find. The pressure, too." Abandon the investigation came from unexpected directions as well. Sarah's sister Eleanor, who had initially supported her quest for answers, now urged her to accept the official explanation and focus on healing. "You've lost weight, you're not sleeping, you've spent nearly all your savings on this private investigator," Eleanor said during a tense dinner at Sarah's home. "Michael and Lily wouldn't want this for you. They'd want you to live your life, not lose yourself in conspiracy theories. They'd want the truth," Sarah countered. "And I'm getting closer to it every day." "What truth, Sarah?" "That some phantom trapper murdered a biology professor and his little girl over some notes about illegal snares? It's not rational. It's not healthy. And it's not bringing them back." Sarah didn't respond immediately. She walked to her study and returned with a manila folder, which she placed on the table between them. Keith found these police reports from the last 5 years. 3 separate incidents of confrontations between researchers or park rangers and illegal trappers in the preserve. One ranger was threatened at gunpoint. A graduate student had their research equipment destroyed. A wildlife photographer had their campsite vandalized with a warning to mind your own business. So yes, it is rational to consider that Michael might have encountered someone who didn't want their activities documented. Eleanor leafed through the reports, her expression softening slightly. "Even if that's true, Sarah, the cost to you is too high. You've lost your job, you're burning through your savings. You're isolated from everyone who cares about you." "Not everyone," Sarah said quietly. "You're here." Keith believes in this investigation. "And I've connected with other families through the blog, people who lost loved ones in the wilderness and never got satisfactory answers. I'm not alone in this." The blog had indeed connected Sarah with others who understood her need for certainty. Among them was Michelle Torres, whose husband had disappeared while hiking in Denali National Park 3 years earlier. The official explanation that he had fallen into a crevasse had never sat right with Michelle, especially after another hiker found his camera nearly a mile from any known crevasse field. "They stopped looking too soon," Michelle told Sarah during one of their regular phone calls. "Once they have a plausible natural explanation, the case gets filed away. It's easier that way for them, not for us." As winter's grip tightened on Alaska, physical investigation of the river area became increasingly difficult. Keith focused instead on background research, developing profiles of individuals with connections to the area where Michael and Lily had disappeared. One name appeared repeatedly in local news archives and ranger incident reports: Marco Alvarez, a fishing guide whose territory included the stretch of river where the Harringtons had vanished. "Alvarez has had multiple run-ins with authorities," Keith explained, spreading newspaper clippings across Sarah's dining room table. "Guiding without proper permits, trespassing on protected lands, allegations of harassing wildlife for clients' photo opportunities. And he was cited twice for illegal trapping in the exact area," Michael documented in his journal. Sarah studied a photograph of Alvarez from a local tourism brochure, a weathered man in his 50s with a no-nonsense expression and calloused hands that spoke of a lifetime on the river. Would he have known Michael? "Almost certainly," Keith confirmed. "The guide community is small, and Michael was well known among local outdoorsmen. According to one of Alvarez's former clients I spoke with, he had strong opinions about academic types, interfering with traditional practices in the name of conservation. Strong enough to—" Sarah couldn't finish the sentence. Keith's expression was grave. "I don't know yet, but he deserves more scrutiny than he received during the initial investigation." The ranger's report mentions interviewing him briefly. Alvarez claimed he was guiding a client group miles away when the Harringtons disappeared. Was his alibi verified? Partially. He was seen with clients that morning at a lodge near the river mouth, but his whereabouts that afternoon and evening are less clear. As they dug deeper into Alvarez's background, another connection emerged, one that sent a chill through Sarah. The fishing guide had once been employed as a wilderness survival instructor for the local Boy Scouts troop. The same troop where Brian Foster now served as scoutmaster and where Lily had participated in father-daughter campouts with Michael. Brian was one of the first people to organize search parties when Michael and Lily went missing, Sarah recalled. He's been nothing but supportive. He created a memorial fund in their names. Keith nodded thoughtfully. And that might be exactly why we need to look more closely at him. Sometimes the most helpful people have the most to hide. The investigation took an unexpected turn in late January when Joseph Winters, the elderly fisherman who had reported seeing Michael's canoe, called Keith in a state of agitation. I remembered something, Winters said, his voice quavering with age and emotion. When I saw those fellas with the canoe last summer, there was something else. Something that didn't seem important at the time, but now I can't stop thinking about it. Keith drove through a snowstorm to Winter's small cabin outside Fairbanks. The old man was waiting on his porch, breath clouding in the frigid air. It was the fishing rod, Winters explained once they were seated inside. One of those young men was carrying a high-end fly rod. I noticed it because I've been saving for one just like it for years. Custom grip, distinctive blue thread wrapping on the guides. You don't forget a rod like that. Keith felt a prickle of anticipation. Can you describe it in more detail? Blue and silver with some kind of inscription on the handle. Couldn't read it from where I was standing, but it caught the light. And the case, it had a university logo on it. I remember thinking it was odd, these rough-looking fellows with such a fancy academic-type rod. Keith showed Winters a photograph of Michael Harrington holding a fishing rod. Like this one? The old man's hands trembled as he put on his reading glasses. That's it. That's the very one. I'd stake my life on it. Keith immediately called Sarah with the news. We need to find out if Michael's fishing rod was custom-made or if it was a common model. If it was unique. It was, Sarah interrupted, her voice tight with controlled emotion. I gave it to him for our anniversary the year before. It had his name engraved on the handle, and the case had the university emblem. I listed it in the items missing after the disappearance. The implications hung between them, unspoken but clear. Someone had been in possession of Michael's personal effects after his disappearance, items that should have been lost in the supposed animal attack and drowning. Keith's next step was to re-interview every person who had participated in the original search, focusing on who had access to which areas and what they reported finding. Most cooperated willingly, viewing the follow-up as routine case review. But when Keith attempted to speak with Brian Foster, the scoutmaster who had been so helpful during the initial search, he encountered unexpected resistance. I've said everything I know to the authorities, Foster told Keith curtly when he called to request an interview. This constant revisiting of tragedy isn't healthy for the community or for Sarah. Someone needs to help her accept what happened and move forward. I understand your concern, Keith replied, keeping his tone professional despite his growing suspicion. But new evidence has emerged that contradicts the official findings. As someone who knew the Harringtons well and participated extensively in the search, your insights could be valuable. What new evidence? Foster demanded. More internet speculation? More grieving denial? I respect what you're trying to do, Mr. Parker, but you're enabling Sarah's inability to accept reality. The conversation ended with Foster reluctantly agreeing to a brief meeting at a local diner the following week. But when Keith arrived at the designated time, Foster was nowhere to be found. A waitress handed Keith a sealed envelope. That man who was supposed to meet you asked me to give you this. Said something came up with one of his scouts. Inside the envelope was a typed note. Upon reflection, I have nothing to add to my original statements. For Sarah's sake, I hope you'll encourage her to seek grief counseling rather than false hope. Brian Foster. Keith stared at the note, a sense of unease growing within him. Foster's abrupt cancellation and impersonal message seemed at odds with the supportive friend Sarah had described. As he paid for his untouched coffee, Keith made a mental note to dig deeper into Foster's background and his relationship with the Harringtons. That evening, as heavy snow blanketed Fairbanks, Keith compiled everything they had learned over the past months. The hidden canoe, the fishing rod in the possession of strangers, the lack of physical evidence supporting an animal attack, the inconsistencies in witness statements, the undocumented structures along the river, the connections between key figures like Alvarez and Foster. Piece by piece, the narrative of a tragic wilderness accident was unraveling, revealing glimpses of something more deliberate, more calculated, and infinitely more disturbing beneath. The wilderness, it seemed, might have been merely a convenient backdrop. Nature's dangers invoked to mask the actions of a predator far more dangerous than any bear. Keith called Sarah late that night, his voice quiet but urgent. I think it's time we take everything we found to the state police. This isn't just about inconsistent statements or overlooked evidence anymore. I believe we're looking at a deliberate attempt to use the wilderness as a cover for something much worse. Sarah's response was immediate and resolute. I'll meet you at the station tomorrow morning. It's time the right people heard the truth. As Sarah hung up the phone, she gazed out her window at the snow-covered yard where Lily had once built snowmen, where Michael had taught her to identify animal tracks in winter. For the first time since their disappearance, the crushing weight of uncertainty began to lift. Whatever truth awaited her, however painful it might be, would be better than the hollow comfort of a convenient explanation that had never truly fit the facts. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own revelations. But tonight, Sarah allowed herself to feel something that had been absent for too long. Hope that the wilderness would finally yield its secrets, and that the truth about what happened to her family would emerge from the shadows at last. The Alaska State Police Station in Fairbanks stood like a fortress against the February snow, its brick exterior unyielding against the elements. Inside, Detective Sergeant Andrea Nichols reviewed the substantial file that Sarah and Keith had compiled, her expression revealing nothing as she flipped through photographs, transcripts, and timelines. Occasionally, she would pause to make a note or ask a clarifying question, her methodical approach both reassuring and frustrating to Sarah, who had hoped for a more immediate reaction. "You've done extensive work here," Nichols finally said, closing the file and meeting Sarah's gaze directly. "Some of these inconsistencies are concerning, particularly the witness statement about the canoe and fishing rod. That falls outside what we'd expect in an animal predation scenario." Keith leaned forward. "We believe there's enough here to justify reopening the investigation, possibly as a criminal case rather than an accident." Nichols nodded slowly. "I agree that further investigation is warranted, but I need to be clear about expectations. We're not taking over your theory. We're examining the evidence objectively. That may lead us back to the original conclusion or somewhere new entirely." "I understand," Sarah said quietly. "I just want the investigation to follow the evidence, wherever it leads. That's all I've ever wanted." Detective Nichols assigned 2 officers to the case, a forensic specialist named Torres and a veteran investigator named Walsh who specialized in remote area crimes. Together with Keith, they developed a systematic approach to revisit key aspects of the original investigation. Their first priority was locating and examining the canoe that Joseph Winters had reported seeing. This proved challenging. Nearly 7 months had passed since the sighting, and the landscape had transformed through seasonal changes. Nevertheless, Walsh obtained a search warrant for an area encompassing several miles of riverbank near Bell's Landing. including any structures or outbuildings where a canoe might be stored. The search yielded nothing at first. Then, on the second day, Officer Torres discovered fresh tire tracks leading to a small equipment shed behind an abandoned fishing cabin. The shed's padlock had been recently replaced, its shiny brass incongruous against the weathered door. When they forced entry, they found the space recently cleared out, with only a few empty gear racks and the lingering scent of boat varnish. "Someone moved something large from here, and recently," Torres observed, pointing to dragged marks on the dirt floor. "Within the last few days, I'd guess." "They knew we were coming." "How would they know?" Sarah asked when Keith called to update her. "That's what concerns me," Keith replied. "Only a handful of people knew about the search warrant. Either someone at the station leaked information, or ... double quotes, or someone's been monitoring us," Sarah finished. The thought sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the winter cold. While the physical evidence of the canoe remained elusive, Detective Nichols pursued another angle: financial and communications records for both Marco Alvarez and Brian Foster. The results were illuminating. Alvarez, despite his history of violations and confrontational attitude toward academics like Michael, had indeed been guiding a client group on the day of the disappearance. Cell tower data confirmed his location miles downstream, and multiple witnesses corroborated his alibi. Brian Foster's records told a different story. Though he had claimed to be leading a scout camp out the weekend of the disappearance, financial records showed he had canceled his reservation at the campground 2 days before. His cell phone had pinned towers near the area where the Harringtons had vanished, then gone inactive for nearly 14 hours, unusual for a man who typically made dozens of calls daily for his work as a construction contractor. Most concerning was what Torres discovered when reviewing Foster's internet search history, obtained via warrant. In the weeks before the disappearance, he had researched topics including Yukon river currents, dissolving evidence in water, and how to mimic animal tracks. 3 days after the Harringtons vanished, he had searched "How long before missing persons declared dead Alaska?" "This doesn't look good for Foster," Nichols told Sarah and Keith during a case update meeting. "But it's still circumstantial. We need something more concrete to bring him in for questioning." That something more arrived unexpectedly through Sarah's blog. A former scout leader named Daniel Kress contacted her after reading about Foster's possible connection to the case. "I worked with Brian for 2 summers before I moved to Seattle," Kress explained in a recorded interview with Detective Walsh. "There was something off about how he interacted with the younger girls, especially during father-daughter events. Nothing I could prove or report, just lingering glances, unnecessary physical contact during demonstrations. I mentioned my concerns to the troop committee, but without specific incidents, they didn't take action." Kress paused, visibly uncomfortable. "The thing that really bothered me was how he kept photographs. He claimed they were for the troop newsletter, but he had hundreds of pictures of certain girls. Always the same type, slender, dark-haired, usually around 9 to 11 years old. Lily Harrington was in many of those photos, always centered, always in focus." This testimony, combined with the financial records, cell data, and search history, provided enough probable cause for a search warrant for Foster's home and property. The search was planned meticulously, with consideration for the possibility that Lily might still be alive and held somewhere on the premises. On a cold March morning, state police officers surrounded Foster's isolated property outside Fairbanks. The main house yielded nothing immediately suspicious, no hidden rooms, no obvious evidence of criminal activity. Foster himself wasn't home, having left early for what he told a neighbor would be a multi-day hunting trip. It was in a detached workshop behind the house that investigators made their first significant discovery. A hidden compartment beneath a workbench contained a waterproof case. Inside were Michael Harrington's wallet, his university ID, and several pages torn from his research journal, the same journal he had used to document illegal trapping activities. Walsh and Torres expanded their search to a small storage shed at the edge of Foster's property. What appeared at first to be a simple outbuilding revealed a carefully disguised entrance to an underground space, a crudely constructed bunker, reached by a trapdoor hidden beneath stacked firewood. What they found inside turned the investigation from a probable homicide to something far more horrifying. The space had been furnished as a primitive living quarters with a cot, chemical toilet, and shelves stocked with non-perishable food. Children's clothing was folded in a plastic bin. On the walls were dozens of photographs of Lily Harrington, some taken from public events, others clearly captured without her knowledge. Most disturbing were recent photographs showing a thin, frightened-looking Lily inside the bunker itself, proof that she had been alive and held captive long after her supposed death in the wilderness. Sarah was waiting at the police station when Walsh called in the discovery. Detective Nichols took the call, her professional composure momentarily cracking as she listened to the details. When she hung up, she crossed the room and took Sarah's hands in hers. "We found evidence that Lily was alive after the disappearance," she said gently. "She was held in a bunker on Foster's property. She's not there now, but this is definitively a kidnapping case, not an accident." Sarah's knees buckled. Keith caught her before she fell, helping her to a chair. "Alive?" she whispered. "All this time? Where is she now?" "We don't know yet," Nichols admitted. "But Foster left recently on what he claimed was a hunting trip. We've issued an APB for him and his vehicle. Every law enforcement agency in Alaska is looking for them. The next 48 hours unfolded with excruciating slowness for Sarah, who remained at the police station, refusing to leave despite Keith's gentle suggestions that she rest. Foster's face appeared on every news channel, his vehicle description broadcast hourly. As the search expanded, so too did the investigation into his background, revealing a disturbing pattern that had gone unnoticed for years. 3 children had gone missing during wilderness excursions in areas where Foster had been present over the past decade. All cases had been classified as tragic accidents: a drowning, a fall from a cliff, an animal attack. None of the bodies had ever been recovered. In each case, Foster had been among the first to organize search parties, offer support to the families, and eventually establish memorial funds or scholarships in the victims' names. He inserts himself into the investigations. Profiler Dr. Helen Martinez explained to the assembled investigators. "It's a common pattern among certain types of predators. They want to witness the aftermath of their actions, control the narrative, and present themselves as community heroes while hiding their true nature." The breakthrough came on the 3rd day of the manhunt. A state trooper patrolling the remote Dalton Highway spotted Foster's truck parked at a rarely used Forest Service road. A tactical team was assembled and thermal imaging drones deployed over the dense woodland. The images revealed 2 heat signatures in a small cabin nearly 2 miles from the road, one adult-sized, one much smaller. The extraction operation was planned with Lily's safety as the absolute priority. A negotiator attempted to establish contact with Foster, but received no response. As darkness fell, the tactical team made their approach, surrounding the cabin silently. What happened next would later be pieced together from body camera footage and forensic evidence. Foster, apparently realizing he was surrounded, emerged from the cabin with a hunting rifle. When ordered to drop the weapon, he instead raised it toward the officers. The shot that neutralized him came from a state police sniper positioned in the tree line. Single bullet that ended the threat without endangering the child inside. Lily Harrington was found huddled in a corner of the cabin, physically malnourished but alive. Her first words to the female officer who wrapped her in an emergency blanket were a question that broke the hearts of everyone who heard it. "Is my dad okay?" The reunion between Sarah and Lily at Fairbanks Memorial Hospital was private, witnessed only by a child psychologist and Detective Nichols. What passed between mother and daughter in those first moments remains their own, a sacred space of grief and joy too profound for public consumption. What emerged in the following days, however, was a story of unimaginable horror and extraordinary resilience. Lily, through gentle questioning appropriate to her traumatized state, revealed the outlines of what had happened that summer day on the Yukon. Foster had approached their campsite late in the afternoon, claiming he was checking fishing conditions for an upcoming scout trip. Michael had greeted him warmly, offering coffee from their camp stove. The attack had come suddenly, a blow to the back of Michael's head with a heavy object while he was tending the fire. Lily had tried to run, but Foster caught her, covered her mouth with a chemical-soaked cloth. Then she remembered nothing more until waking in the underground bunker. The story of Michael's fate emerged through forensic evidence rather than Lily's testimony. Foster had weighted Michael's body with rocks and sunk it in a deep section of the river. Later, he had meticulously staged the campsite to suggest an animal attack, deliberately tearing Lily's jacket and creating bear tracks using casts he had made himself, a technique he had ironically taught to Scout troops during wilderness survival lessons. The recovered fishing rod, which had been Foster's undoing, had never been intended to be seen. He had kept it as a trophy, along with Michael's wallet and journal pages. The staged discovery of the rod with bear cubs had been a desperate attempt to reinforce the animal attack narrative when Sarah's persistent investigation began gaining traction. Foster had manipulated Joseph Winters indirectly, knowing the old fisherman's routine and deliberately placing the rod where he would spot it and report it. Most chilling was the evidence found on Foster's computer. He had followed Sarah's blog obsessively, monitoring every new development in her investigation. He had created anonymous accounts to post discouraging comments, sent some of the threatening notes she had received, and even attended the memorial service he had helped organize, recording Sarah's grief in a video file titled simply Aftermath. As the full scope of Foster's crimes came to light, the community of Fairbanks was forced to confront uncomfortable truths about how easily they had accepted the animal attack narrative, how quickly they had dismissed Sarah's concerns as denial, and how completely they had been deceived by a predator in their midst. Ranger Lawrence, who had so firmly defended the wildlife encounter theory, issued a public apology to Sarah. "We failed your family at every level," he said, his voice thick with emotion during a press conference. "We allowed assumptions to guide our investigation instead of evidence. We prioritized convenience over truth. And in doing so, we became unwitting accomplices to a monstrous deception." The case prompted a comprehensive review of all presumed wilderness accidents in Alaska over the past 15 years. 2 cold cases were reopened based on similarities to the Harrington disappearance, leading to the recovery of remains and long-delayed justice for other families. For Sarah and Lily, the path forward was neither straight nor easy. Lily's 2 years in captivity had left profound psychological wounds that would require specialized treatment for years to come. Sarah, vindicated in her suspicions but devastated by the confirmation of Michael's murder, faced the complex task of rebuilding a life with her traumatized daughter while processing her own grief and trauma. The media, which had once portrayed Sarah as a grieving woman unable to accept reality, now painted her as a heroic mother whose refusal to accept the official narrative had saved her daughter's life. Book deals and movie rights were offered, then gently declined. Sarah had no interest in publicity. Her focus remained entirely on Lily's recovery and creating a safe, private space for healing. 6 months after Lily's rescue, Sarah finally shut down the Finding the Harringtons blog. Her final post was brief. "We have found our answers, though they were not the ones we hoped for. Michael is gone, but Lily is home. For those still searching for their own answers, don't let anyone tell you to stop asking questions. The wilderness holds many dangers, but the most dangerous predators are those who use nature as their cover and our assumptions as their camouflage. Keith Parker's role in solving the case established his reputation as a meticulous, determined investigator. He specialized thereafter in cold cases, particularly those involving disappearances in remote areas. He and Sarah maintained a friendship bound by the intense experience they had shared, though both were careful to give Lily space without constant reminders of the investigation. Joseph Winters, the elderly fisherman whose observation of the fishing rod had provided a crucial breakthrough, struggled with knowing he had been manipulated by Foster. "I saw what he wanted me to see," he told Keith during a follow-up interview. "He used me to spread his lie." Despite reassurances that he had ultimately helped uncover the truth, Winters sold his fishing gear and rarely ventured to the river again. The psychological assessment of Brian Foster, conducted posthumously through his writings and digital records, revealed a calculated predator who had used the wilderness as both hunting ground and alibi. His understanding of how authorities and the public perceived wilderness dangers had allowed him to operate undetected for years, hiding his crimes behind the convenient narrative of nature's indifference. "The truly frightening aspect of this case," wrote forensic psychologist Dr. Martinez in her official report, "is not that Foster was particularly clever, but that our collective assumptions about wilderness dangers created the perfect blind spot for his activities. We were so ready to believe that the woods and waters had claimed these victims that we never seriously considered the human predator walking among us." For Alaska's outdoor community, the case prompted difficult conversations about safety, vigilance, and the dual nature of wilderness areas as both places of genuine environmental danger and potential cover for human violence. The State Parks Department implemented new protocols for investigating disappearances, requiring that human involvement be ruled out through specific investigative steps before natural causes could be officially determined. 3 years after her rescue, a 13-year-old Lily established a small foundation in her father's name, dedicated to developing better search protocols for missing persons in wilderness areas. The Michael Harrington Wilderness Safety Initiative provided training for first responders and equipment for search teams across Alaska. Though still healing from her ordeal, Lily found purpose in creating something meaningful from tragedy, a way to honor her father while potentially saving others from similar fates. On the 5th anniversary of Michael's death, Sarah and Lily returned to the Yukon River for the first time. They did not visit the site where tragedy had struck, but instead chose a different section of the river, one with no memories attached. Together, they released a small wooden boat containing a letter to Michael and watched as the current carried it away, following its natural path downstream. "The river keeps flowing," Sarah wrote later in a private journal. "No matter what happens on its banks, it continues its journey." Perhaps that's what healing is, not forgetting or erasing what happened, but finding a way to keep moving forward, carrying our experiences with us as we go. The wilderness of Alaska continues to draw visitors, with its pristine beauty and sense of untamed majesty. It remains a place of genuine environmental challenges, where nature's indifference to human life can indeed prove fatal to the unprepared or unlucky. But the Harrington case stands as a somber reminder that sometimes the most dangerous predators are those who walk on two legs, using the wilderness as their accomplice and our assumptions as their greatest weapon. As for the Yukon River, it flows on, indifferent to the human dramas that unfold along its course. Its waters have witnessed both natural tragedies and calculated evil, carrying secrets downstream and occasionally, when the current is right, bringing hidden truths to the surface. For those who know where to look and refuse to accept convenient explanations, the wilderness sometimes surrenders its secrets, revealing not only the dangers inherent in its untamed spaces, but also the darkness that can hide within the human heart, disguised as part of the natural order.